Thank you, and good afternoon. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what LearnAsia does in the same area. We work at the moment in 12 countries in emerging Asia, and we work on similar things as DIRSI and RIA, which Christoph represents. We learn from each other's methodologies, and we develop new ones and apply them as per our region, what's relevant for our region. Okay, so the session is about measuring sector performance. So what we really want to know, what we want to measure is connectivity. So has access to ICTs gone up? Choice, do consumers have a broad range of choice to meet their particular needs? Is the quality of services good? And are prices coming down? Are they services affordable? Okay, so firstly I'll just briefly look at the kind of the indicators that are being used for these to measure sector outputs, and what we've found in our research is that the conventional indicators that are used broadly in this field are not ideal. Data is not always accurate, data is not always on time, it's not always available, and so on. So in terms of connectivity, what we usually look at is the number of fixed or mobile or internet subscriptions, the numbers per 100, teledensity, and so on and so forth. But what these numbers, these overall numbers, these supply side numbers, which come, as we know, come from operators, they don't account for how the services are actually used. So they don't account for, in the instance of mobiles, they don't account for multiple SIM ownership, which we have found in Asia to be quite high. In fact, as I'll show you later on, in Pakistan, you've got something like 23% of poor mobile subscribers have more than one SIM card. So it doesn't account for inactive SIM cards that are still being counted by operators, doesn't account for people who share mobile or internet connections. They don't tell us anything about these users, which I think that information is most relevant for public policy. Whether these users are rich, they're poor, they're male, they're female, what divides exist in between user groups, and so on and so forth. So the next set of indicators is quality. Again, the usual suspects, as I say here, the usual suspects are often flawed, and in the case of mobile and internet quality of service, pretty much absent. Traditional measures like waiting lists, call success rates, and so on and so forth, they're more for the fixed phone sector. There's little data published, and often ways of measuring sector performance are intrusive, they're costly, and so on and so forth. So I'll talk a bit later on about what we've tried to develop. Again, price, you've got problems with usual price measures. If you're looking at ITU numbers, they measure the price of a cost, they compare call prices by using just the cost of a 3-minute call, or the cost of 1 megabyte, 1 MB of data. So these numbers, they don't reflect the different usage levels. They don't distinguish between post and prepaid users. They don't account for connection costs, installation costs, handset costs, taxes, free minutes, and so on and so forth. And you have also issues with different definitions. And they, most importantly, can't tell us about affordability. They can only say what the price level is, but affordability is still, you can't tell anything about affordability from that. So what do we do? What does LearnAsia use? So for connectivity, I mean, this is not to say that we just completely ignore supply side data. We think supply side data is very important, but it just doesn't tell you the whole picture. We also do a large amount of demand side work. So this data here is based on a large survey of telecom users in Asia in 6 countries. This is the most recent study in 2008. So in this case, we surveyed over 10,000 what we call bottom of the pyramid telephone users, so the lower socioeconomic categories, the poor essentially. And this is the 6 countries that we work in on this survey: Bangladesh, Pakistan, India, Sri Lanka, Philippines, and Thailand. So what these numbers have shown us that, okay, yes, say in India, 34% of these poor people do own a phone, but in fact 59% use a phone. They have used a mobile. So what I'm trying to illustrate here is that difference in ownership and access. It doesn't account for, the supply side numbers don't account for these. Similarly with internet use, there are issues in supply side data, which again I'll come to. So here's the multiple SIM data that I was talking about. So Pakistan 23%, India 9%, Sri Lanka 16%, and so on. Again, these numbers are from our demand side survey. The importance of what I'm trying to stress here is that demand side research can tell you these intricacies. So you can see which connections are urban, which connections are rural. Your supply side data can't tell you that much. It can tell you which divides exist. So in this case, we see Pakistan and Bangladesh have gender divides in mobile access, whereas Philippines and Thailand absolutely don't. And it can tell you interesting things like, do people even know what the internet is? This finding was very shocking to us, that in these Bangladesh, Pakistan, and India, these people, more than half of them don't even know what the internet is. So what are we really talking about? And it tells you what people are doing with their phones. So in this case, yes, they're making calls, they're sending missed calls, doing SMS, taking photos, and so on and so forth. So I'm also going to talk a little bit about what we've successfully done with the data in terms of policy interventions. So in this case, we use this demand side data to illustrate the point to policymakers that the poor do use mobiles to a large extent. They depend on them. They have quite a lot of use for them. And this is, in 2007, the Sri Lankan government proposed a change in the mobile tax structure. So what they proposed is a 7.5 mobile subscriber levy, so an increase from the existing one, plus a 50 rupee flat rate tax, roughly about 50 US cents. So what we did is we used the data to illustrate, A, that the poor are using the phones and they depend heavily on them, and then secondly, we then illustrated the case to say that, okay, this tax is going to affect these poor people the most. And through multiple media interactions, consultations with policymakers, and so on, this tax was changed. It wasn't removed, which would have been the ideal case, but it was changed. The flat rate, the regressive component of the tax, the 50 rupees, was knocked off, but the mobile subscriber levy was increased. But at the end of the day, people did as you see from the last column of the table, with the revised tax, the people who spend the lowest amount on mobile usage actually would have gained the most in terms of this tax change. So this is another application of demand side data, some recent research that we've done. What we found is the ITU numbers, which are reported on internet users, are actually just derived from taking the total number of subscriptions and multiplying it by a factor X, a multiplier. This multiplier is determined in some way, some arbitrary way, and in some countries, like Afghanistan, it's as high as 500 people. Burundi, 13. So what this is saying is that in Afghanistan, for every one internet subscription, there's 500 people using it. Therefore, internet users is subscriptions times 500. So this methodology that we've developed recently, we've used existing demand side data for the countries where it exists.